I thought that it was, for me personally, really quite interesting, Diane, that you and Sam were right next to each other, because it sparked a dilemma that's been inside of me for a long time. One that I might get upset about. But,
it's allowed.
You know, I was part of a spiritual community for a long time, and I really felt like I was totally humiliated. And I felt that when you started talking about it, Sam, what it brought out in me was the voice that kept me in the community, which was, this isn't going to be what I want. I should just learn how to take this. I guess what I'm speaking to in this moment is that I don't expect it to be perfect. And I don't expect it to meet me on my terms, but nor do I want to be scapegoated or excommunicated from a community. And as practitioners, I feel like it's our duty to find more skillful ways to love people, not to let them know that dissatisfaction is what awaits them. So I'm wondering if somehow you guys might, I don't know what the hell you'd say to that.
Have it out. Ironically, if we have a strong ego, and if we're relatively skilled in the world, we can maybe get through that and do pretty well. But for a lot of people, they can't. And that's really my concern, is they just have to leave because they can't deal with that. And I personally feel like developmentally that this radical rigor that Sam's describing is the beginning and the end point of all of it. But somewhere in the middle, there has to be some ability to dialogue. There has to be a willingness on the part of people in power to take feedback, to listen to that feedback, to respond to it, and then ultimately still retain their leadership. This is where it becomes a yellow phenomenon and not a green bog. You know, because I'm not open to everybody's point of view, and it's all, I mean, there is some discriminating awareness and some, you know, something vertical that returns in a way. But my personal view is that I think we have an opportunity to develop that skill, but I don't think we have yet. That's my personal view, and I don't know how you would respond to that.
Well, I have a problem.
I know you do.
I'm a lucky guy. I've never had these issues. I know people have these issues, and I can see why people have these issues, but just to be truthful, I don't have them. So it's secondhand. I have even counseled people who have these sort of problems, but all these things are individual. And I believe all phenomena is subjective in terms of how we relate to the world. We all experience our own subjective phenomena. Our relationship to spirituality and so on, if we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, we should get out. Even if the system there says there's no way out. There are personal choices that are subjective, and personal experience that is subjective. As far as leadership training, I believe in leadership training, but there is a lot of bad leadership training. Just to call something leadership training is a ridiculous thing. Most leadership training produces, as far as I'm concerned, produces bad leaders because it's very limited. In the spiritual tradition, and I tend to be, I find it interesting because I'm a really radical person that I end up being the traditionalist about these things. I find it totally ironic, to tell you the truth. But I believe that the absolute best education is to live with and be with a genuine spiritual teacher, totally in the human sense, day to day, nothing hidden, no BS. And the only way you experience something totally, if you're, this is my subjective point of view, you have to understand, is by that sort of relationship. But that's the traditionalist point of view.
But let me ask a question, okay? Mm-hmm. And I asked this a little bit earlier, and it's an example that many of us have gone through. And I also think one of the things we're talking about is teaching and leading, maybe not leadership training, but good leadership skills are real. They are. That we teach our students how to negotiate these ethical dilemmas that are genuine and that really do arise. These are genuine ethical dilemmas we're faced with. And you say you never went through any of this, but I think your community went through really strong ethical dilemma after Trungpa Rinpoche died, and you must have been there.
Oh, yes, I was there.
Well, what'd you do?
What did I do? I
Yeah.
became depressed.
Yeah.
And then I pulled up my socks and went on. You know, what am I supposed to do? Lay there and cry? No, I mean, I said, what am I supposed to do? What I did is what my teacher told me, a situation like that, and I believed my teacher, I have faith in my teacher, is pull up your socks and walk on. But again, I tend to be the traditionalist in this thing. I love it.
That's his story, and he's sticking to it. You know what?
If you don't like it, tough cookie.
Let's get maybe if Vid and Sally could briefly comment on this issue, because it is an important issue, and it's almost in a sense like a dialectic in the true sense. In other words, there's sort of a purity of a position, and then there's sort of the realistic kind of position. And I think we all agree there's important truths on both sides of those. And the difficulty is always we all believe in the middle path, but it's hard to know what the middle is, because you're never quite sure you've got the two extremes exactly right. And oftentimes you think you've got the middle path and you've really just got one of the extremes.
That's because the middle is really never the middle, you see, because that's an extreme.
Well, that explains it.
Yes.
Remember that next time you get in a fucked up community.
That's it. You got it?
But they've also they've worked with students, and I'm sure they have some reflections on this. It's an important issue, so maybe both of you could comment briefly.
Can I borrow your pen too?
You bet.
Thanks. I'm going to give it back.
You got it.
You may have noticed I raised my hand 4 or 5 times. It's on video. So I'm excited to jump into this debate, or this issue, not really a debate. But I'm going to say that although I am excited to engage it, as I have some sense of what I'm about to say, I feel like it is incomplete, or it's not necessarily the best offering. So actually, I'm going to rely on you guys to a certain extent to take whatever it is that I offer and actually sift the gold out of it. You know, I'm not able to fully do that at this time, but you can help. This is not my example. This is Katagary's example. But somebody said, how do you find the middle? Isn't the middle narrow? Do you guys know this example? I'm always worried about telling jokes 3 times. So anyway, he said, well, like, what if you have a pen? See, this pen is an interesting middle, is what I'm finding out. But how do you find the middle way? And actually, I think that it's kind of instructive if we look at it. He said, okay, to find the middle, and just like Sam said, the middle might not be the middle. Is the middle an equal distance between 2 points? He said the only way you're going to find the middle, which is a balance point, is if you include both sides. Only if you include both sides can you actually find the middle. And it's beautiful. I didn't say very much, so it's not that instructive.
That's good.
The issue for me kind of is it okay to mug people because you're not responsible for their anger? If you mug somebody and they get angry, did you make them angry? Did you force them to be angry? Actually, isn't the position of their own mind actually somewhat their own territory? And aren't they somewhat responsible for it? Is everybody who's mugged gets angry? Not necessarily. So I think sometimes actually people get mugged and they're like, hey, wait, I'm getting mugged. And yes, I'm pissed off. And they're like, well, see, that's your problem. You're pissed off. What if you weren't pissed off? We're like, yeah. And I've actually been told this, though, and I think I ran the experiment because I was like, yeah, all right. And so I stayed there, and there's more mugging went on. And then, but eventually I wasn't upset anymore. I wasn't angry. And for a second, you're like, oh, yeah, this is sweet. You're totally, wait a minute. But you're still getting mugged. You're not upset about it anymore, but at the same time, it doesn't mean nothing needs to be done. So it's not this just green, like, yeah, whatever, that's fine. Let's be mugged or we won't be mugged because we're not angry. You're like, no, wait a minute. We can do something with this situation. So then you can begin to creatively endeavor with it. And you can even take it with a different perspective. What if you observe this? Sometimes you think you observe a mugging in progress. And people say, no, don't you realize that the person who's angry, I mean, yeah, that's the fundamental root of the problem. You're like, yeah, but they're still getting mugged. And if you stop the mugging, It doesn't mean that the person's not going to be angry anymore. It doesn't mean this, but still, maybe the mugging should be stopped. Okay. And maybe we can find a way to engage this where that doesn't have to happen. That being said, because I'm kind of leaning too far to one side, there's a lot of alleged muggings. There's a lot of imaginary muggings, a lot like when you're asleep, and then you wake up and you realize, oh, well, that was a dream. We project a lot of muggings that are not happening. We feel like we get hit a lot more. That is just a total projection and abstraction of our own mind. But at the same time, like the real situation of a mugging points out, there are actually situations that occur that aside from our own, and I think somewhere this has to fit into your integral theory, that aside from our own subjective anger or understanding or any lack thereof, there's still the issue, a totally separate issue that needs to be addressed and dealt with just the same. So that's kind of where I feel the tension is, and you have to realize both. You can't say, yeah, let's just stop the mugging, because there is that core of us that gets angry and can't be mugged. And that's a big problem. And we're not going to be free unless we really see through that and clarify that ground. And sometimes that's why being mugged every once in a while is not that bad of a thing. It really helps us to see through this issue. See, I wouldn't say that we should go out and look to get mugged, but I mean, just like go through your day-to-day life, it feels like it happens. So then instead of it's seeing it as a bad thing, like we have to shut this down, we actually enter into it. We include it and then maybe transcend it, which is actually another form of inclusion. And then when this begins to sift down, the actual anger, because see, when we're angry about it, again, we can't do anything. We have no effectiveness in the world dealing with it. But when that dies down, and so that absolutely has to die down, that absolutely has to get ground away. But then there's still the issue of the mugging that we have to take care of. So that's my 2 cents.